Hello, my name is Yahaira. I'm here with the Future Business Leaders of America Club at Woodland Community College. Here we are at the Spotlight. We're going to be interviewing Kenneth Hong. Thank you, Kenneth, for joining us today.
Thank you for having me today.
Can you tell us a little bit about your business?
Yeah, sure. I own a business called Postmarks. It's located in Davis, California. And what our business does is provide business services such as mailbox rentals, notary services. We do packing and shipping. We do passport photos, shredding. We do a lot to provide these essential services for businesses to get on with their life. And we always are improving on or increasing the amount of services that we provide to our customers.
And can you tell me what got you started into this business?
Well, before I started this business, I was working in the corporate world. I worked for Apple for several years down in South Bay in Cupertino. And the thing about that is the hours are very long. You have less freedom as to what you can do when you want to take like vacation, things like that. And at that time, I just started a family, and it was difficult for me to justify missing out on so much of my family's life, like my little kids. So I decided to make a change in my life and started looking for either jobs or opportunities that provided more flexibility so that I wouldn't miss these precious moments in my family's life.
Other than your family, what's another challenge that you faced?
So, well, when I purchased the business, it wasn't doing so well. So, on top of the business, kind of the financials weren't that great, and me not having prior experience in running my own business, that initial leap to going from the corporate world to like being responsible for an entire business and employees was kind of scary because I didn't know exactly what to expect. But I suppose that one just has to do it to kind of know, and I just decided that it was worth taking that risk to be closer to my family and spending more time with my family.
What's the thing that motivated you the most?
Well, the thing that motivated me the most was just the idea of the challenge that I can take on and develop something from essentially your ideas. So you're not really, like, for example, you're working in a corporate world. You basically do what your boss tells you, and you do the best within that framework. Like, you work within that department and you try to do the best you can, but you don't have that flexibility at that level to decide what it is that you want to do. So I think what motivated me to even explore the business side was, what was exciting for me was the idea of being able to take a business and grow it however I see fit. So that was exciting for me.
Mm-hmm. When starting your business, how many hours would you say you put into it per week?
Starting my business, I lost track because it mostly is, it's not like a corporate job when you clock in at 9 and you leave at 5. It's basically, you just work whenever you have time, and problems arise all the time, especially in the beginning. I remember when I first started, I was there, hours before the store opened because I had to fix up a lot of the, technology. Before the store opens, there's things that you need to do. And I was there well after the store closes to do these things, because in between, you're doing, you're helping customers, you're managing employees. There's a lot of things that you can't do within that time frame. So, in the beginning, honestly, I wasn't even keeping track. It was just, I felt like it was all the times, even weekends sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
So.
What's something you had to sacrifice?
The thing I had to sacrifice was a nice job at Apple. It was worth the sacrifice, but sometimes you kind of get into that mindset where it's like, I'm at this comfortable job and I'm getting paid well, it's hard to just leave that because it's the comfort, the security of having that job, and then going to something that is unknown. I could fail, I could lose money or whatever the case is. So that was what I had to sacrifice, the idea of security to pursue something that can be, greater or potentially makes me more money or gives me more satisfaction.
What's something you would like to tell somebody that's nervous on starting their business?
Well, I think every business owner probably was also nervous before they started, but I think an important thing to keep in mind is be smart about it before. Don't just jump into things. Some things can, on the surface level, seem great, but I find a lot of times when you dig deeper, you could discover a lot of things you might not expect. So it's very important that you be smart about it, especially if you're investing a lot of money into it, or maybe taking out loans and things like that, to not jump the guns too quickly. But at the same time, don't think too long, because it's a really good balance. You might miss your opportunity if you just think, and no action. So I had to kind of balance out the two, because I'm the type who thinks too much, and I frequently miss opportunities, or I'm too scared because I overthink. So it's really striking that good balance, but being smart about it.
How did you find Postmarks?
So I was actually a customer of Postmarks for the longest time. I lived in the area, and that was when I was still working at Apple. So imagine the commute time. It was kind of stressful, but I learned that the owner didn't want to deal with the business anymore, is looking to sell. So that's kind of when I inquired about the financials and started doing some research into figuring out whether or not this business is worth investing in and the potential for growth. So for me, a big part of it is I wanted to purchase a business in which I can grow it, not just maintain, essentially. So.
And how would you say you market?
So my marketing strategy is through mostly digital marketing, and also I wanted to run it in a way that I want to, rather than trying to maximize. I know businesses, you always say maximize income, minimize expenses. For me, I try not to minimize some expenses, but try to maximize income to compensate for that. I kind of like treating my employees. My philosophy is treating my employees how I would be treated, or how I want to be treated, because I think that is reciprocated, because if I treat my employees the way I want to be treated, then in turn, if I'm not there, for example, they're gonna show that when their interaction with the customers. So that's one of my sort of philosophies and my marketing strategies is I want to build a business in which I can be proud of and the community can be proud of, not just for the sole purpose of maximizing income, right? So if I make enough, I want to share that, and I think it comes around. Like the community knows Postmarks really well, and they appreciate going there, just for the service, and I think a lot of modern day businesses lose that, and everything is just numbers. So, so my philosophy might be a little bit different, but it's working for me. And I hope to be able to keep that and not get lost in the numbers too much.
How long did it take you to start seeing income?
Well, that's a tough one, because when I first bought the business, it was a week before the COVID shutdown. So it was very worrisome, because you're trying to learn everything, and then on top of that, you have to figure out what's going on with COVID. And then I had to pivot a little bit to kind of help bring customers in during these times. So basically what I did was I tapped into my old networks, and I was able to source a lot of face masks and things like that, and I was able to bring customers in to say, hey, come do business with us, we have face masks. But that was very nerve-wracking. So as far as to answer your question, how quickly did I see positive revenue was it was probably a couple of months into it. So it was important to adapt with the situation and not get too stuck up on being a victim of your situation. So I just figured out a way to pivot the business to bring in more customers.
What was the biggest challenge you faced during COVID?
Well, Postmarks is in a community where there's a lot of older folks. We're south side of Davis. There's the El Mercero. They're usually on the older side. And during COVID, I feel that the more cautious demographic of individual are the older and the immunocompromised. So from taking it from that approach, I figured that if I provide certain services and products that can help these older folks prevent contraction of COVID, then they would have ways of, they would come into our store and utilize or purchase our products and utilize our services at the same time.
Do you wish you started sooner?
That's a hard question to say. Maybe if I had my current knowledge or that knowledge of the time, then I would start sooner. But life is a journey of like learning and maturing. So I don't think I would have the same type of maturity level and the knowledge to start earlier. So I don't say I regret it, but you know, it's hard to say because life is in stages, right? So it's like if like for example, are you a college student here?
Yeah.
You know, your priorities might be different than mine. So for you, it's probably just growing your craft or whatever it is you're studying. And then once you develop to a certain point, then you might want to consider the next thing. So, but if you start a next thing too soon, then you might setting yourself up for failure. So I feel like I started at a good time. I don't necessarily have the regret of saying I want to start earlier because I feel like my business is where I want it to be today. And that's probably has to do with my maturity level and my knowledge that I had at the time when I started the business.
When you started your business, were there a lot of people supporting you?
Well, yeah, when I started my business, my family at the time was supportive just because I was able to move closer to home and be with my family. Of course, you know, everyone had concerns because it is a business. When you own a business, there's a lot of uncertainty, but fortunately for me, I had support, but I think mostly I didn't have any opposition. Let's just put it that way. Maybe not all like everyone's supportive, but I didn't have too much resistance.
Do you have any messages for young entrepreneurs that want to start their business?
So my message to young entrepreneurs that want to start their own business is just be smart about it. Don't get caught up on this dream of, you know, this far-fetched dream sometimes. I mean, take it in small steps and try to ground yourself in reality. I think for me, I see a lot of businesses that they shoot for something way too far, and when they've faced their first like obstacle, they sort of just give up. I think it's good to set realistic standards, and to do that is to do research on how it is to start business, what is it to expect, and just kind of have that realization that it might not turn out the way you want it to be all the time. And don't be scared that if you run into obstacles, because I think there's always so many creative ways, and I think a lot of it has to do with your mindset too. So if you narrow yourself too much or you contain yourself too much, it's hard for you to problem solve certain things. So I think it's a balance. You know, you want to be ambitious, but at the same time, you got to ground yourself in reality and just take things one step at a time. And young entrepreneurs sometimes might not have the resources to develop the business that they want. You know, I would say, hey, work in that industry, build some experience, build some income, have a plan, and then execute. And, you know, it goes back to that question you asked me about if I had any regrets, you know, it's, you always want to learn and build yourself so that you can get ready for that one day to run your own business. Because, you know, an 18-year-old trying to run their own business, that's why actually, I think that's why there's probably a statistic out there I heard somewhere where it's like the most successful business owners are usually people who are like in their later parts of their life. And I feel like that kind of goes back to what I'm saying is you become wiser through the experiences that you gain through life. If you try and fail, don't be afraid to try again, because even through that failure, you're learning something. And you just have to take it as a learning opportunity and take that and move forward so that you can not make those same mistakes again and build a better business or improve your craft, whatever it is that may be.
What's the biggest challenge you've noticed young entrepreneurs face?
A lot of young entrepreneurs, well, they face numerous issues. One is, I actually, before they even start, I notice a lot of them have excuses that prevent them from even starting, you know? And I think I was sort of one of them at one point, where I would go to these places and you hear a lot in the media or mainstream where they're like, these rich people, like they have family that is also rich and that's how they got their start. Like we're not like them, so we're not gonna be successful. And I think that kind of mindset limits you. Like you basically are setting yourself up to have this negative mindset, so you're not gonna succeed. I would agree with that sort of like, yeah, you might have an upper hand if you have the resources, but I wouldn't say that's like the only thing you need. And there's plenty of opportunities out there, you just have to be creative. So I have met a lot of people who have this mentality and they essentially give up before they even try. So I would encourage people to just, hey, you know, I came up from a very poor household, didn't have much either, but I try not to let that stop me. It's hard sometimes, and I acknowledge that it is hard. But I think people, especially in this country, we have a lot of opportunities that we can go from a poor household to build yourself up to, you know, I mean, I'm still pushing and I'm still trying to get up there. So I think it's important to keep in mind to not just be a victim of play victim all the time. Try to fight against that a little. Try to push back, you know. Mm-hmm. And I know the world is not necessarily fair to everyone, but don't let that be the only reason to just stop trying.
What would you tell your younger self?
What would I tell my younger self? I would say don't procrastinate, because when you're young, you always think you have all the time in the world. You know, you're like, I'm gonna do that later. I'm only 18, I'm only 19, I'm only 20. And then every year goes by, you get a little bit older, and you find ways to cope with yourself to say, that's okay, no problem. And then the older you get, the different excuses you give for yourself. And you're gonna be like, well, I'm not succeeding because of X, Y, and Z, and it's always somebody else's fault. I think what I would tell my younger self is cut it with the excuses, you know, seize the moment, do it now. TNT, today, not tomorrow. Basically, yeah, that's a huge one for me.
Okay, that's good. Thank you so much for being our guest, Kenneth.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure being able to share my experiences with everyone. I hope it was very enlightening and it was helpful for those young entrepreneurs out there. I wish you all success and don't ever give up.
Thank you so much for watching. This is our FBLA Spotlight.